Hi, I'm Aisha McCracken, founder of Ignite Healthcare Network, and welcome to our webinar series, Igniting Leadership, where we provide thought leadership, share experiences, and discuss important topics to help women rise to the top of the industry. Before we get started, I'd like to make you aware of an exciting upcoming event. The annual fire pitch competition scheduled for January 20th in person at the TMC Innovation. It's the culmination of the largest accelerator program in the country for women-led digital health and medical device startups. This year's program started with 130 applicants from around the world. This grand finale event brings together an incredible ecosystem to hear pitches from the 8 top scoring startups from our accelerator, and they will be competing for over $500,000 in investment prizes, as well as opportunities to work with TMC Innovation and J Labs. Registration information for this event will be coming out soon, so please keep an eye out for it and don't miss this great event. Now you're in for a great conversation. I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Newman to get us started. Kelly, you're on.
Thank you, Aisha. Couple housekeeping things. I want to be sure that as we take questions at the end of this conversation, that you all feel free to jump in. I'm sure that there are going to be some great things that Myra intrigues you with. So I want to encourage you now to keep track of some of those questions so that she has an opportunity to answer them at the end. Also, if this is your first time viewing an Igniting Leadership program and you're interested in some of the past episodes, you can find all of those posted on Ignite's website. So I encourage you to go back and listen to those other conversations we've had because they've been great and we've been able to feature some really wonderful speakers. But tonight we have Myra Davis, who is Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer with Texas Children's Hospital, where she leads a talented team of 520 IT professionals, which in itself I find extremely impressive. As CIO, she negotiates, analyzes, and manages multi-million-dollar budgets and has collaborated with other TCH leaders in establishing an impressive portfolio of both short and long-term enterprise strategies. Myra most definitely sits at the table of influence and power. I'm very proud to work alongside her on Ignite's board, but I am particularly pleased to be able to call her a friend. So thank you, Myra, so much for doing this evening, and I'm really looking forward to getting started on this conversation.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
I can't believe that there is a woman executive participating in tonight's program who hasn't experienced that moment of being the only one at the table, so to speak. And certainly women executive of color have experienced that very often. And no matter how confident you may feel about your capabilities, it still is a very intimidating situation. So let's start the conversation with some of the choices you have to make in those moments.
Well, first, when I think about the word intimidating situation, the first thing that comes to mind is one, do I actually acknowledge, do I realize that I'm intimidated in situations like that, or do I think I thrive and embrace off of situations like that, and I embrace them. That's probably because if I reflect on it, I'm allowing myself to be somewhat vulnerable, innocently, but realizing that I am vulnerable. It's also, to some extent, just a part of who I am, and allowing myself to just really be true to myself and really being authentic in situations like that. Do I notice it? Yes, and that's the mindfulness of having awareness that it exists, but not creating it as an excuse, or even allowing it to become an intimidating situation, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it does sort of sets the stage to say, once I'm in there, then I go, oh, what, right? So then there's the act of courage There's the act of having perseverance and putting it all into perspective. And then there's just the confidence to say, I'm going to welcome the dialogue around the table. So it's just a culmination of emotions, reflection that my mind goes through and has gone through in situations like that. But it does sort of set the stage, and it creates a welcoming dialogue. But it's a lot of practice. I say this really easy, but it has come with a lot of practice. So over time, I'm only able to articulate this because of the many years I've been in the situation. I will say early on, I completely stumbled through it, but I think I sort of mastered, here are the 5 attributes I need to pay attention to before even walking into the room.
So would you say in that description that you try not to overthink the situation and yet prepare yourself as much as you can going into it?
Oh, yes. That's really, I improvise. So what I mean by that is don't overthink it. Go in, establish sort of, what it is that you're going to look for, pay attention to your audience. That's the mindfulness side of it. Don't pay attention to the obvious. The obvious will be there, but how are you going to respond to it is to create a level of comfort that you are a part of that team in the room, not that you're singled out in the room.
I think also too, people tend to adjust or adhere to what's happening in a room too. And I'm wondering if you have found that your level of confidence that you have purposefully brought into a situation, if you have seen that influence others, or maybe I'm overthinking it already.
No, you're not. No, I think imagine walking into a room as a female and you are the only female. Mm-hmm. Imagine what's on the mind of those that are watching you walk into the room. Imagine that the mind of those that are watching you walk into the room, what are they saying to themselves? Oh, wow. They could be saying she's bold, she's brave, she's confident. As you look at the body language, they could be uncomfortable, probably more uncomfortable than you are, because they're trying to understand how to respond to you. So that's a part of the immediate awareness of saying, how am I going to set the stage so that we don't make the obvious the uncomfortable and become an excuse for not really engaging in the dialogue.
Yeah,
dialogue.
I'm thinking of, gosh, we all have male co-workers. Houston is the most diverse city in the country. So in our work environment, this doesn't seem to be an issue, but it's like there is a magnifying glass put on that situation in those C-suite table of power situations where we're still not seeing as many women or women of color or any number of other attributes that makes you the only one at that table. We're not seeing that diversity yet. So it's like outside those doors, it's not our experience, but once we walk inside those doors, it changes, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It actually does change. And I think through my career, I've watched the evolution of it. But I've also, it's sort of allowed me opportunity to practice how to get it right when I walk into the room. Yeah. So as I said, what I share with you now is really from the level of practice, a lot of practice sessions, so that I'm completely confident or comfortable. I should say comfortable being in situations like that.
So let's key off of that point of doing it right.
Sure.
And how do we balance a natural desire for acceptance and not compromise our maybe opportunities for speaking up or maybe participating at a level that we would like to, in other words, we've got a little bit maybe of a tug of war going. And I think that this is probably true for those first time or one-off situations where you find yourself being the only one at the table, not necessarily, the twice a month executive team meetings where it's like, okay, we're past that point. But how do we balance that inside desire for acceptance and still, overcome that discomfort?
Kelly, I think first and foremost, it's okay to that. I balance it by acknowledging that we are all different, right? And it's okay to value differences, whether it's in race, whether it's in gender or voice or tone, right? We are different. That sort of creates a natural balance for me to sort of accept that conversation or the dialogue that I will become part of. It does sort of focus on, again, being mindful and acknowledging that it's time to value this. And if you sort of set the stage with that as a backdrop, I actually think, it opens up the door for you to be able to have the dialogue with those that don't look like you, walk like you, sound like you.
Mm-hmm.
But I often have a saying that we all put our pants on the very same way.
Sure.
And that's how I balance valuing differences. At the end of the day, if you don't put a right leg in first or the left leg in first, however you choose to, because unless you want to jump in, that's fine as well. That's a level setting at that point, and then at that point, you're not compromising anything. You're still being true to yourself, but what you're doing is sort of acknowledging, having a conscious decision to acknowledge that there will be differences, and that's okay. And that sort of opens the door to create that confidence and also create the comfort to accept dialogue from those around the table that don't look like you.
I think your comment earlier about how it may be that other people around you, or a select number of them, are feeling more uncomfortable than you are, is a really interesting comment, because I think that is very insightful, and it kind of gives you a sense of power in helping those people feel more comfortable. There's almost a sense of graciousness that you can even maybe assume a little bit in, I'm going to help you feel a little bit more comfortable in this situation. And it puts you kind of on the, it gives you an advantage, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I think I don't know that fits everyone, but if you cannot assume that everyone is of the same understanding or the same disposition or the same background and education that you have.
Sure.
And so it's okay when you sort of walk in the room and you're the only one, but you allow it to be a moment of teaching and acceptance and understanding.
Right.
I'm not saying we get into historical conversations or anything, but the reality is there's probably a lot you're probably having the same emotions or concerns that I have, but you don't have to, you can mask it because so many around the table look like you. So you can pretend, but I can't. And so knowing that for me has really afforded me, again, to, I don't know if that's just a high degree of comfort within my own skin, but it just really gives me the confidence to say it's okay to walk in that room and be different, because they're different also.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So obviously a big priority or objective for Ignite is getting more women in that room of power and influence.
Yes.
So what mistakes do we make as women executives in healthcare in particular, but this can be true really for any industry? What mistakes do we make that sabotage that opportunity for more women to be sitting at that decision-making table? And how do we navigate those waters once we get there? You've spoken a little bit to that in terms of modeling and embracing your confidence and just, preparing yourself for that moment. But are there things that you see executive women doing in some capacity are we sabotaging our invitations or our circumstances in those rooms? Do you see anything like that would be important for us to acknowledge?
No, I don't, having been at Texas Children's for as long as I've been, I've seen a lot of great women leaders in the organization, which has really been inspiration for me. And I think each of them have had their own voice. They have been authentic. They have been confident. They have been extremely knowledgeable, and they are strong. And that's not strong like in a man's strength or anything, but just really, I think the biggest mistake anyone could make is, and they didn't, of course, is women. We must acknowledge it's okay to acknowledge other women in the room. That's important, and that's not a negative, but it's okay to do that. It's also okay to acknowledge if there's no other woman in the room. I think that's also equally as important, in that we need to encourage more women to be in the room. I think being willingness to talk about it is also courageous and bold, and not pretend that you don't see it. That would probably be, I think, the biggest mistake is, not acknowledging that there is more diversity needed in the dialogue. And again, diversity in terms of race and gender and voice. If we all, and so when you're having conversations about situations, et cetera, I find it fascinating that if you're all coming from the same background, really, is that a really valuable conversation? Or are you taking the time to engage and embrace other voices and other perspectives? And I think that's acknowledging that. The biggest mistake will be not acknowledging that. And so having self-awareness, having awareness, and being mindful of situations and intentful is really important. And this is a time where we must be purposeful in acknowledging that you must engage and you must have a variety of voices that speak to any topic in order to get the richness of the conversation going.
And we had a quick comment I wanted to call out in reaction to Kelly, your question around things that we might see women do that might kind of be sabotaging themselves, right, in that situation. And one of the comments from Sarah was that sometimes women might, instead of being genuine, I think, Myra, to your point, you had mentioned that, having their own, really seeing their own perspective in things, instead acting like the men in the room, or becoming even more ruthless than the men in the room. So I think overcompensating maybe to become more like a kind of stereotypical male in that workplace. So we did have a comment around that.
Okay, well, shout out to Sarah because she segued so perfectly into the next question. Sarah, you must have ESP and let me ask that question so you can expand on that point, Myra, but we had anticipated this a little bit because authenticity is huge. And there's a lot of navigating factors to consider in those situations, including reading the room and being authentic to who you are. But what do you say to women who say, yeah, but you've got to play the game to get ahead? Or to Sarah's point, they abandon their authenticity and maybe they're overcompensating or they're trying to mirror the behavior or what they think the other people are thinking and behaving as. What do you say to that? And authenticity with a big A, I'm sure, is something that you embrace.
I first of all, I embrace authenticity in all caps, and I think it's okay. First, and also, what is the game? You know, and so when we say playing the game, there's an underlying assumption there is a game.
Right.
But what is that game? And I think that's important. I also think it's okay as women. We know we bounce, we have a lot of balls in the air, professionally and personally. But I think what we experience personally is actually makes us stronger professionally. And so it's okay to be true to who you are, because once again, if you think about what I said earlier, if you're the only woman in the room, one amongst many males, there's a concern there that's a complete opposite of how do I have a conversation with Myra in the room at this time? What am I going to say? How do I say it? What's my inflections, etc.? Because there's just a secret and known conversation that may happen amongst males that may need to be excused or compensated for a female being in the room. So that's something you have a chance to actually help change. The second is, it's okay to be yourself in the room, meaning, oh, I have to take this call from my kiddo. Well, we all, what's not humanly possible about that? Again, accepting the differences of actions in the room. I think, you know, Kelly, I asked the question, what is the game? Because I don't know that we should think about how to play the game, because that also creates a mindset that there is something, that there are rules that we must, there are more rules that we must understand before we just open that door and go in, be ourselves, have the confidence, understand the audience, be mindful, and be able to have a comfortable conversation, recognizing just at the end of the day, we're all in here for a purpose and a reason. And how do you exude that fact that my voice matters?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, again, going back to Sarah's point, I mean, there are some things that people do just because they're nervous. You know, they speak louder, they laugh louder, they become a dancing bear or whatever, you know, out of a reaction of nerves, which could be true regardless of situation that they're in, where they feel just a little bit uncomfortable. So what have you done in those moments? Do you have any tips in those moments where, you know, you kind of have that inside conversation with yourself of, hey, you know, calm yourself, you know, get a hold of yourself, and you know, I keep going back to the conversation we had last with Christy Anderson and personal branding. You know, how do you calm yourself? Right. How do you overcome that discomfort of, I'm the only one in the room that looks like me, and yet feel that confidence of extending your personal brand? Maybe that's meeting number 2 with this group.
Yeah, it could be. I think you don't want to overthink it to where you're not vocalizing your concerns. If you have a concern in the room and you happen to be the only woman of color in the room, yes, I'm well aware you don't want to come across as, you know, all the things that they say about women that are enraged, right? But at the same time, if there is a point that I need to make, then it's really how I portray that. But if I say nothing, that's doing a disservice to any other woman that must have conversations in the room. That's also sort of allowing the audience to believe that they were right, or that I was accepting of their thoughts and opinions. And I think what I have learned to do, and I know I believe I do this well, is to have some grace but tone in the conversation, but also be, again, intentful, purposeful in having that dialogue, but don't back down. That's to your earlier question, what could we do wrong? Not saying anything would definitely be the wrong thing to do.
Right. Is just, I'm just going to keep that to myself. I don't want to draw
Right.
any attention to myself. I already feel like there's so much attention on me anyway. So I'm just going to kind of, disappear a little bit.
Yeah, and I don't think that's I don't think that's what we should do.
No.
It's okay to be different, right? We know that there's a upward, we know we have continuation of work to do to get women to the table and in the room and in the dialogue, or to embrace our Ignite audience to want to pitch ideas for the entrepreneurs. We know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what we can't do is, and what I would advise not to do, is to walk into a room where it can be intimidating, it can look intimidating, appear intimidating, but embrace that. That's a part of the entrepreneurial spirit. That's a part of having confidence, is to embrace it. Don't overthink it. Overthinking it sort of allows yourself not to be who you are. And at that point, you sort of sacrifice being authentic at that point.
Yes. Yes. I'm hearing the overthinking. I'm Kelly. I'm an overthinker. Nice to meet you. So you're speaking my language. Okay. So let's talk about something.
And I should say something, Kelly, too. Is it risky to not overthink? Yes, it is. Could you say something out of turn? Yes, you can. Could you, maybe not have the right tone? Yes, you can. But at least you got it out there and you embrace the dialogue. I mean, is it risky? Yeah. But are you okay with that? If you have confidence and you're comfortable, it's okay. It's okay to be different.
Well, I mean, think about it this way. I mean, we're not talking about entry-level situations. How do you interview for your first job? We're talking about the power tables. We're talking about the table of influence. We're talking about, the C-suite executives. So you're not there because you're not used to taking risks. You wouldn't be invited to that table if somebody didn't think you had something to contribute. So
exactly.
I think that is also important, that, you absorb that too, that look, if I sit here and I don't say anything, I mean, wouldn't it be ironic if you got kicked out of the room because you didn't contribute anything? And that was just because you didn't have the confidence to speak up. So
that's correct.
Yeah. Let's remember, you got invited into that room. You wanted into that room. You've worked your whole career to get into that room. Now, claim your space. Just don't overthink it.
Right.
Okay.
There you go. Be a team player.
Let's talk about those moments that, again, it would be so fun if we were all in the same room and we could just sit in a big circle and everyone could share their experience of what I'm about to ask you about, because we know that we all have stories to tell of ignorant questions or even sometimes hurtful comments that are made in those situations. It's not often. And, God bless those that came before us, because they had to endure just some really out front, blatant situations. But, they can still happen. And we all have that experience every once in a while. So how do you recommend that women who may be finding themselves in this situation where they're at that executive level, but more importantly, they are the only one like them at the table, how do they prepare for those encounters? And what is it that's important for you to walk away with?
Again, don't overthink it. That's a theme. 2, it's okay to be uncomfortable in those situations, but it's also important to be bold and courageous enough to confront that situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the confrontation of it matters, and again, with grace.
Right.
And it needs to be real time, not delayed time, so that you can sort of talk about role play. What if that was you? Let's, let's have some, because again, it's around, let's not assume that, those that you're having these encounters with clearly understand or even have an idea of what you're going through. And I think being willing to educate or have very uncomfortable dialogue real time is really important. And that makes, that's not comfortable. Sometimes that makes you really uncomfortable, but it's extremely valuable. And what oftentimes you realize is there's a response of, I didn't even see it that way.
Right.
I didn't intend it that way. I didn't see it that way. I had no idea. And it's like, that's okay. But you do this for those that come behind you that potentially experience in the same audience. Over time, you're building a self-awareness and a level of awareness that probably is not there.
Yeah, right. There's a sense of, there's a responsibility of education where, and I'm thinking as you were talking, something that Brene Brown talks a lot about is, what if you assumed that that person was doing the very best that they could? What if it is ignorance, unintended ignorance, and they just don't know better? Well, it's your job to help them understand better. And as you say, in a way where it's educating with grace, but with a level of intensity that they understand, not dismissing it, but being emphatic. And you can do that through tone of voice, you can do it through facial expression, you do it through eye contact, all of those kinds of things come together, I think, to register with that other person that, thank you for educating me. But I think, I think you're right that you don't want to be sitting there kicking yourself that you didn't take that appropriate move.
Right. That's to your question earlier, that would be a big mistake, not acknowledging it.
Yeah. I can think of a couple times where, thankfully, before I left the room, I took the opportunity, but I didn't hear anything being said to that point, because I knew that I was going to hate myself if I left that situation and didn't address it. And, it's just one of those moments where you feel, your mother and every other woman that's been important to you in your life behind you saying, oh, no, this needs to be addressed.
And that's one of the, sometimes I sort of classified as, that's a door that sometimes we walk by, and there are times when you have to stop at that door and say, no, we're going to have to talk this through. We have to open it and have a dialogue about it. Because of all that you think about in terms of, how you were raised, or who's behind you, who you're mentoring, et cetera. It's important for us to do it for women, for the voice.
Well, and I mean, I say that, and you have to balance that with also what's appropriate. So it may be that difficult conversation is not meant to be had there in the room at that moment. It may be better spent as a private conversation otherwise, but to your point, it is not to compromise yourself, and to have that courage, even if afterwards you have to sit down or your knees are going to, go out from underneath you, which we've also.
Yeah, but it's a really good feeling.
It sure is.
It's a good feeling when you do that. Yeah.
It's a kind of a combination.
You feel good about yourself.
Lightheaded joy and knees knocked out from underneath you, kind of all at the same time. Okay, so before we get to inviting questions, it sounds like in general, it's embracing discomfort, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, and having that courage of stepping into that discomfort, but at the same time, not overthinking it where you even create maybe a defensiveness. Like if you may go in there thinking, okay, man, I'm loaded for bear, and the first person that says anything, ow, that's not going to serve you well either.
That's
So
right.
it's really trying to strike that balance and staying authentic, but not shying away from the discomfort, or embracing your role of expectation that put you there. You have something to contribute. That's why you've been invited. That's the role you have to play.
And I've worked extremely hard to be there.
Right.
Let's not forget about that.
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
It didn't just magically happen, right? So that's important also. I've earned it. I've earned it. And having earned it, you are there. To your point, you don't just sit there. You have a role to play, not only for yourself, but for other women. And in my case, other women that look like me, right? So you have a role to play and a responsibility to that's a responsibility, and it's something that you must be mindful of. Because we're not going to work forever, and there are going to be others that come around. And just the more we embrace educating and understanding and valuing differences, it's something that, again, we must be intentful about, and we just have to.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I agree. Yeah, I find it interesting when I've heard from a woman who I respect so much, and she's so intelligent, and yet talks about how she held herself back. Now, in part because she saw how others kind of got, they were that tall nail on the board and they got slammed a little bit, and she was a little reluctant to put herself in that situation. But what a shame, because I'm thinking of a situation where she had a lot to contribute, and that was unfortunate that she didn't kind of embrace that courage and move forward. Okay. Before we completely strike a chorus of "I am woman, hear me roar," let's invite some questions from our participants. So Megan, do we have some questions in the chat room that Myra can answer?
It doesn't look like we do right now, no. But anybody that might have a thought, a question, please feel free to share. You can either put it in the chat, or if you want, you can raise your virtual Zoom hand there, and I will unmute you so that you can directly have a conversation with Myra and Kelly.
The other thing too is, if anyone has a circumstance that they felt, they are particularly proud of how they handled, stories are the best way for us to learn, and we retain that information better than anything else. So if somebody has a story to share, that would be great. Can you think of a time, Myra, where a circumstance where you applied some of the advice that you've talked about, where we can use that as an example?
Yeah, so I've moved around a lot in my career. Lived in four states. And I think every place I've lived has had some cultural differences, and it sort of afforded me a chance to really build my confidence and create comfort, and also and it's been bi-directional teaching and understanding of different cultures. And something that stands out that happened really personally was, we moved to Minnesota in the 90s, 2000 timeframe, and late 90s, I should say. And we moved in a neighborhood where we were the only family of color, but the neighbors really embraced us. But the irony is, our oldest child, he was young at the time, he was out playing, and the kiddos would come and play with them, and they would rub his head. And I thought they were just rubbing it, and he thought that felt really good. And he was, and one of the parents apologized. And I said, what are you apologizing for? She goes, I'm so embarrassed. I go, what are you so embarrassed for? Because we've never had people of color in our neighborhood in this texture of hair. The kids are, it feels bushy. Oh, I said, but he loves it. So just having a little levity there. But I said, it's okay, and so they've become our best friends.
Oh, wow.
But, those are moments where, as I said before, I had two choices to make. I could have gotten, very nasty and defensive, but what would that have solved? That's my neighborhood, right? So it was a moment to educate and say, hey, it's acceptance of differences. And so that's an example where, it's okay to embrace something different, but how you go about it speaks to the other earlier conversation of having grace and still having an educational, direct, real-time conversation about it, but not in a bad light. So, that was a personal experience that I hold on to, because I think it was also a pivotal moment for me to go, wow, that I didn't realize that was happening, and the family didn't realize. Well, the mother was extremely embarrassed, but again, we're best friends now. We laugh about it now. It's funny.
What do the kids think about it?
Oh, they're friends as well. They're fine. Yeah.
Well, I think, oh, go ahead, Megan.
Oh, I apologize. I was going to say, so I can ask a question here just for myself.
Yeah.
I'll use the fact that I can easily unmute myself to
Take the reins, Megan. Take over.
No, so there's something that was spoken about earlier that I would love to hear more about, because it's something that I think about quite a bit. And I find myself in a situation sometimes where I will start to feel like I am not being heard, or I'm being spoken over, or and I can find that frustrating sometimes. And my response is not productive, right? My natural inclination, and I try to fight it, but I do cave sometimes, is just to talk more, to feel like if I talk more or louder, then that will compensate for the fact that I'm not being heard. And 100% of the time that does not work. I know it doesn't work, but it is a natural inclination, right? To just be louder or speak more, and somehow that will make people hear you. And we kind of touched on that earlier, but given that I think about that a lot, I'd love to kind of get your thoughts and feedback about something that I struggle with.
I think, Megan, those are, I'm an introvert, believe it or not. So in many conversations or meetings, I sit and I do a lot of listening. And there's a lot of talking sometimes in some meetings. And sometimes I don't know if the talking is just I want to hear myself, or if there's really a point to make. I actually think it's all in timing of insertion of what it is you have to say. In some cases, you have to ask yourself, is this a dialogue worth contributing to? And if so, when's the timing right to inject your point? I think that's important. And in some cases, maybe the dialogue is your contribution to that conversation may be in the form of a question. I have a question, and reframe your point and reframe it to be a question, to where those that are really talking may not have the answer, but they may actually punt back to you and ask you, what are your thoughts? And so it's kind of an indirect way to get your point across, a little extra work. But sometimes that does work if you're really trying to sort of add commentary, but not being given a chance to be heard. Frame it in a question to those that are having dialogue, who says, oh, you want to hear from me? Not really. I want you to put it back on me, and then I can give you my ideas about it.
No, I think that's really helpful for me, because I have the opposite problem. I'm an extrovert. So I have that on top of the fact that I'll just speak more and louder, that I do like to talk to people. And I think if I can still do that, right, but frame it in a question, I'll definitely try that out. We did get another comment, it looks like, about kind of poor experience that was had with a female manager, and how that really caused some, it looks like some self-esteem was damaged, and really made this person worry about reporting to female managers again. So she's got some issues because it sounds like this went bad. Now trying to think about how to not kind of be turned off from that situation altogether. And I can read through the full comment here if you'd like. So the comment here is, Sarah's last female supervisor was very protective of her because she had a high visibility. It was a high visibility strategic initiative. She didn't want other people to take credit for her work. And when it was decided that her peer should be first line, her female manager asked to allow her peer to take credit for her work. She kind of got, it looks like, pushed down a little bit. I'm guessing it doesn't say in here that she was contracted, but never converted her to a full FTE, even though she was working really hard, doing hard assignments, really doing jobs that might normally be assigned to even VPs. Eventually, it really impacted her career, and her contract was never converted to FTE, and she was terminated. So because of that really bad experience with that female manager, now she has concerns about that. So any feedback there or thoughts on that?
Okay, I have some thoughts, Myra.
I'll let you go first.
Okay. Here's the thing that I think is so interesting, and women are just as guilty of this as anything else. Why do we think that all women managers are going to be great? Why can't there be horrible women bosses and great women bosses? And it's interesting because you can hear a woman and man say, oh, I never want to work for another woman again, because they've had a singular bad experience. But if they've worked for a male, is it like, well, I sure don't want to work for another man again? Because there are just as many horrible men and wonderful men and horrible women, and every category you can think of, there's a ringer in every one of them. So I guess part of it, and I've worked for, I mean, it was early in my career, but man, I would put her up against whoever you worked with, this person that asked the question. But I think that instead of thinking, I don't ever want to work for another executive woman, it's more looking at someone who is so intimidated or threatened that they don't want to give me credit or whatever. I personally would encourage you to take the gender out of it, because I think that it's unfair, and I know that it is so typical. And like I say, women do it just as much as men do, but I wouldn't suggest that just because she was a woman executive that you throw all women bosses out the window. What are your thoughts, Myra?
No, I was going to speak to the generalization of the comment, and overgeneralizing it about having one women gates the earlier conversations we've had around just creating ways for us to encourage each other. So I wouldn't want that experience to portray what it looks like for reporting to any other woman, because that's really not the case overall. Mm-hmm. It just really sounds like maybe a bad experience felt by someone, but basically what you were saying, Kelly.
Yeah, I certainly don't want to dismiss. It sounds like it was a horrible experience, but
it does.
Maybe it's worth drilling down more into what were some of the insecurities and other issues, and taking the woman out of it. Okay,
yeah, there's
Cheryl
a lot to unpack there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Cheryl Stavens has her hand raised.
Yeah, I do. I wanted to ask Myra about other women as mentors and as supporters. I know that it was always important to me to have someone that I could trust and talk situations through. Has that been your experience, Myra? And have you had people that, other women who have been a big support to you through your career?
Oh gosh, yes. I can't even name them all, Cheryl, you being one. There have been, just indirect, whether directly or indirectly, there have been many women in my course of my career that have given me nuggets, that have, just given me opportunities, allowed me to speak, and where, I probably, oh, you want to hear from me? And so that has been, and I've committed to doing that for many women. It's particularly in my field of work, right? And in STEM, we all know statistically there are not a lot of women in the computer science arena. It's male dominant, but to all the conversations I've had earlier, it's really important, and I have been really blessed to have had a lot of great mentors and have a lot of great mentors that are women who just really, mirrored everything I've shared with you about, whether it's improvising, whether it's being confident, whether it's having grace, whether it's just embracing the dialogue, changing the tone of the conversation. And so yes, the answer is yes. I can go on and on, but it's yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm. I think also part of it is being strategic. I mean, for sure, having those support, and thankfully Ignite is a perfect example of that. I mean, to be able to connect with somebody through Ignite that may have experienced a similar situation and join you in doing some problem solving. But I think also it's maybe being strategic and just observing a situation and thinking, okay, how am I going to enter into this? And I'm not suggesting play the game, and not being true to yourself or dismissing your authenticity, but it might take some strategizing too. Have you done that, Myra, where you've kind of come away, maybe there's an executive group that you found yourself in. This is going to be a reoccurring group or reoccurring interaction that you have, and you've kind of taken stock of the situation and then stepped away and thought, okay, here's someone I'm going to need to connect with, or someone I'm going to need to address, or just kind of think about the players around that table and be a little strategic in how you're going to interact with those folks.
Right. Yes, I've had situations like that where one, most of the time, if you have a level of credibility, you've earned that credibility with, the colleagues around the table. When it's time to have a really tough discussion, it's not that it's welcomed, but it's open. The dial, it's ready and primed because you have sort of proved who you are. So therefore, it's a welcome conversation. Hard sometimes, uncomfortable in those cases, but needed. It's also important to know that you may not, are you going in to win the conversation, or are you going in to sort of, what's your purpose for that dialogue? And so that's the type of thinking I have to think about. What do I hope to get out of it? If it's to try to persuade, I need to prepare myself if I don't get that. Am I going to get defensive about it, or am I going to put the facts on the table and walk away? So are you trying to win? Well, I have to also, sort of be honest with myself about that. Ideally, I want to tell you, and I want you to hear it, and I don't want to hear anything else. Well, clearly that's not going to work. So that's what I have to acknowledge. Okay, if that doesn't work, what am I willing to accept that worked? I'm accepting the fact that I made myself vulnerable to have a very uncomfortable conversation with someone, acknowledging, and I'm also accepting that they may not receive it well, and they may be in denial and may not even see it that way, but at least
Right.
I got it off my chest. I
Yeah.
had the dialogue,
Yeah.
and it can never be said that I didn't do that.
Right.
Right. So
Yep.
that's probably what I spend more time thinking about. Is preparing myself for
Mhm.
the different outcomes that may arise if, I'm talking to an adult, right? So I can't imagine if they were going to see everything I see. And so I spend more time preparing myself for that so that I'm not completely disappointed when I walk away from the dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a really good point, is what is it I'm looking to walk away with? What am I wanting? And, going back to Megan's point, because it sounds like part of what she's experienced is feeling dismissed, like being talked over or not, people aren't stopping and listening, whatever. So she's just getting louder and talking more. And so having those separate conversations, but in doing that, understanding what is it I'm looking for, because that person is not
Right.
likely to go to the next meeting and say, oh, hey, man, I've got to admit, I have been a complete jackass to Myra every time she's come in this room, and my apologies. Thank you, Myra, for bringing that
Right.
to my attention. But wouldn't that be fun? That would be it would be worth just, those are the fantasies you get to have, right?
Yeah. And that's exactly what it is, a fantasy.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But it would be a lot of fun to have. Great. Any other questions or anything like that? Myra, what, it kind of cracks me up, because I feel like in a lot of arenas, we keep having the same conversations over and over. And it's like, God, aren't we past that yet? But
Yeah.
I think that what's different about this conversation is we're talking about that power table. We're not talking about being the only one in the whole company that,
Right.
looks like you, or the only one
Right.
in the whole department. Now, that might still be true, but we're at least talking about that C-suite influence and power. So I guess to go back to Cheryl's point, as an organization, and as fellow women executives, how do we, besides having conversations like this, how do we help one another, embrace these situations, go after these situations, encourage ourselves to be authentic in these situations? What can we do as women for women?
I think continue this dialogue. One, this is vulnerable, right?
Mhm.
And I think the other side is, let's not judge each other, right? Let's not judge the words that are being said. Let's understand the words that are being said. Let's understand how we can reach out to others and sort of begin to open up the conversation further with other women. There are, I have found there are many women who are still strangely enough, struggling to be vulnerable and to truly be themselves. And I think, there's more of that emotion than less. And I think what we can do is not judge, we can help, and
Encourage.
we can have that dialogue and encourage. Yes.
Mhm.
But judging would really that would be working against each other.
Yeah, I agree. And you've probably had this experience too, where maybe you weren't the only one. Maybe you were in a meeting with another woman, and then you walk away, and that person opens up to you, makes some great points, and just because she's with you as another woman, she's maybe even speaking more emphatically or whatever it is. And haven't you had that moment where you think, oh, this is what, hey, where were you a few minutes ago? This is what you should have brought to the table. And and maybe just, encouraging one another where it's
Mhm.
like, hey, you know what? If you want me to sit across the table from you, just so you have a friendly face to look at,
Mhm.
I've got your back, even though I'm sitting in front of you,
Mhm.
just to kind of extend that encouragement, maybe.
Mhm. Yes, and that's where their power in numbers, and the more we can work together to support each other in meetings or difficult conversations, the stronger we'll become. But it definitely, we need each other. And if you take nothing else away, it's really don't overthink it. Be true to yourself, and let's help each other.
Okay. I can
As you
embrace
overthink it.
I'm gonna go to bed tonight overthinking this whole conversation. Myra, it's 7:00. Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you.
I
enjoyed it. Thank you.
so selfishly enjoy these conversations, and I feel like I walk away with so many wonderful insights, and I hope that everyone that participated this evening did as well. This is our last Igniting Leadership program for 2021. We have actually a programs committee meeting coming up, so we're going to be putting our heads together and planning out 2022, which sounds amazing. One of the things we're most excited about is regaining our in-person contact with one another, and that's certainly going to be happening with the Ignite finals. So here's to 2022 and being back together in person. And again, Myra, thank you so much. And Megan, thank you as always for your support. Thank goodness we have your technical mind.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody.